Welcome to our little webinar on impromptu speaking with confidence, conviction, and clarity. My name is David Goldwich. I'll be guiding you through this session with some tips and techniques to be a more confident and compelling impromptu speaker. These are a few of the other courses I teach with Aventis. My slide will advance. Assertiveness and confidence. Negotiate like a lawyer. In my previous life, I was a lawyer. So I teach a lot of negotiation. The leader is storyteller. How to use stories in the corporate context, especially if you're in leadership or sales. Difficult people. I suppose everybody's got a difficult people course. And the high impact manager. Some unconventional approaches to what the best companies are doing in terms of their cutting edge management. And I hear some background noise, so some of you may want to make sure you're muted. We will have an opportunity for Q&A at the end. And if you can, it's always nice to see you. So if you can turn on your videos. I know a lot of you are at home and maybe you've got chaos going on in the background. That's okay, we're all in the same boat. It's just nice to be able to see live human beings, even during lockdown. So let's start out with some of the benefits of impromptu speaking. Why is this important? First of all, impromptu speaking means you're speaking without preparation, off the cuff, as it were. But that is a matter of terminology because there are different degrees of preparation. Sometimes you may be speaking without any formal notice, but you still can anticipate some of the things that are going to come up. After all, it would be cruel for somebody to ask you to speak on something you're not familiar with. And the reason they do ask you is because you are the acknowledged expert. So impromptu speaking isn't always that impromptu. Anytime you go into a meeting, even if you're not giving a presentation, you might ask yourself, what will I say if they ask me a question on this subject? Or if they ask me for my opinion? And come up with a short prepared comment, so that if they do ask you impromptu, you've got something prepared. You might also give people a warning in a meeting at work. Hey, I'm going to be talking about this. I might ask for your views later on, so think about it. Okay, so that takes the heat off your colleagues and they appreciate that. So the benefits. First of all, when you learn how to speak impromptu, and like anything else you can learn, you sound a lot more confident because you know you can do it, and you also sound competent because you're doing it. And confidence and competence are what the bosses are looking for. That's what gets you promoted. So this is an opportunity for you because a lot of people are reluctant to speak during a meeting if they don't have to. They're afraid to add their 2 cents. So if you're one of the bold ones and you're able to come up with some appropriate comments, the bosses will notice. It's very good for your career. The second benefit of impromptu speaking is you can crush the Q&A. A lot of times when we speak impromptu at work, it's in the context of a question and answer session. For example, you may have a formal presentation and you've got the slides and you've got a script and you've prepared everything and you're ready to go. You may not love it, but you can manage it. Then you finish and you get to the Q&A. And how do most presentations end? They end with something lame like, that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions? And you're hoping, please let there not be any questions. As we'll see later, you want questions. And the Q&A is when you don't have a script. As we mentioned earlier, you can still anticipate most of the questions you will be asked. Certainly, they should be somewhat on topic. So you can really shine at the Q&A if you learn how to speak impromptu. And this is something you can learn. There was a show on TV not too long ago called Whose Line Is It Anyway? It was a very popular comedy show. And what they had was a number of comedians, and they would give them a situation or some props. And without any preparation, they had to come up with a little skit or even compose a song on the spot, according to a particular topic that was revealed only that moment. All right. And I think one of the reasons this was such a popular show is because there were so many people watching it thinking, wow, these guys are so good. They get it right all the time. They're always funny. I wish I could do that. And the reason you admire them is because they seem so good and you think you're not that good. Well, I've got news for you. They practice. They may not know the topics, but they practice speaking impromptu and concocting these little skits and playing around with props all the time. And it keeps them on their edge. It doesn't mean they're going to know what to say in a given situation, because they've done it so many times before. They're confident that they can do it again the next time. And the third benefit of being able to speak impromptu is it gives you a connection. During a formal presentation where everything is prepared and scripted, you're sort of on autopilot. You don't really get to engage the audience in a human manner. So during this impromptu speaking context or during the Q&A, when you don't have a script and you don't have the slides prepared, that means you can be more responsive to the audience and deal with them at a more human level. And that's one of the things we're always looking for in the world of presentation, how to increase connection and engagement. So impromptu speaking has a natural opportunity to allow you to do that. So those are some of the benefits. There are others. Probably the main other one, and we don't have time to cover this today, we do offer a full one-day course, and we spend a good part of the morning on what to do if you have stage fright, how to overcome anxiety. We might talk a little bit about that today, but we won't cover it completely. So we're going to start out with some nonverbal pointers, because even before you start speaking, people are gathering information from your appearance, from the tone of your voice, your body language, gestures, eye contact or lack of thereof, and a lot of other nonverbal cues. And we don't have time to cover everything today, but we're going to focus on two of them. And the first is eye contact. And then we'll also talk a little bit about that problem of what do you do with your hands. So for eye contact, if I could invite you to type into the chat box, what is the average size audience that you face at work? Do you usually speak to a very small group of 2 or 3 people, like just your own team? Or do you speak in a formal presentation setting with a boardroom of 10 or 15 people, or maybe a classroom or training room size venue with 20 or 30 people? Or do you speak maybe at a sales conference to hundreds or even thousands of people? So let me just get a rough gauge. All right, I'm seeing 20 to 30, 4 to 15, 1 to 1, or a dozen, 15 to 20, up to 100. All right, so it looks like mostly we're in that mid-range of 10 to 30. So let me tailor these remarks to that kind of context. When you're in, say, a boardroom, and you've got one of those big long tables, perhaps with 10 or 20 people around it, how do you make eye contact in a room like that? Well, let's start out by saying how not to make eye contact. And obviously in a smaller room, it's a little bit easier. A big room is another story. But in that middle of the road space of 10 to 30 people, how not to make eye contact. One thing a lot of people do is they just stare at the back wall and they assume everybody will think I'm looking at him or her. But that doesn't work. They know you're looking over their head at the back wall. So don't do that. Another thing not to do is to look at the first person on your left in the front row, and then go to the second person and make some eye contact with her for a few seconds, and then go to the third person and share a little love over there, 4, 5, 6, all the way down the line, which sounds and seems very mechanical. All right, it's like you're a lawn sprinkler and everybody knows exactly where you're going to be next. Now imagine you're next in the queue and you're thinking, all right, she's looking at the person next to me. In a few seconds, she'll be looking at me. All right, now she's looking at me. I'm very unconscious here. Look at the next person. Finally, she's looking at him. All right, so because it's so mechanical, it's not very natural and it's off-putting to your audience. You don't want to do the automatic lawn sprinkler approach either. Well, what about what your teachers used to do when you were in class? Remember when you were in school and you weren't paying attention? What did the teacher do? She would take a few steps towards you, raise her voice, look right at you, and repeat herself, and everybody knew you were not paying attention. Public humiliation. Can you do that in a meeting room of 10 or 20 people? No, you don't want to do that to the boss. And you don't want to do it to anybody else either, because everybody experiences it live, but they also experience it vicariously. And if you catch somebody not paying attention, then people think, well, that wasn't really nice. That could have been me. I also look at my phone sometimes. All right, so you don't want to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about this Zoom scenario, how to make eye contact with Zoom. But the way to make eye contact in a room of 10 to 30 people would be to focus on the friendlies. Once you start speaking, you'll notice that a few people seem especially attentive. They're leaning forward, they're making strong eye contact with you, they're nodding their head. So these are your fans and you want to give them the most love. So you find a few of them and you just go between one to the other, one to the next, kind of randomly, all right? You don't focus just on the boss or the most senior person, and you don't want to leave anybody out. Do not try to bring people in if they're not engaged. Ideally, you want to be good enough and interesting enough that they're all engaged. But if somebody is replying to a message or they've got some urgent email to tend to, you can't control that. Doesn't mean they're not listening, but don't go into this losing effort of trying to win them back when they're not coming back. One reason for that is obviously they're not going to come back. But the second reason is, as we said, there's a vicarious process going on where other people are noticing. And if you're trying and struggling to bring back people who are not interested by giving them a lot of face time and trying to share the love and make them come back, the vicarious observers are going to think this person must not be very good. Nobody seems to care what she's saying. But when you focus on those 3 or 4 friendly faces, the rest of the crowd, out of the corner of their eye, is noticing every time you look at somebody, they're interested in what you're saying. And that means I should pay more attention because it must be worth listening to. So that's the secret of eye contact in the moderate size room. In the small room, where there's only 2 or 3 people, or even one person, it's a lot easier to make eye contact with everybody. But even if it's 1-to-1, you don't want to give them 100% of the eye contact because that seems a little bit like overkill and people get awkward about that. So once in a while, you want to glance away briefly just to take some of the pressure off. For the very big audiences, it's going to be hard to focus on any number of people, but just make sure you're looking in different places and try to engage some good eye contact with some people, especially in the first several rows where you could actually see them and see their eyes. Now, this peculiar condition that we're all afflicted with now because of the age of Zoom, how do you deal with that? Because I don't have any eyes to see. One of the things you do is you can avoid looking at the people in those little boxes. Now, if I consciously look at the boxes, I see a bunch of little black squares. There's nothing really distracting there, except I see myself there. I've got my camera. A lot of people tend to look at themselves because they're wondering, is there anything wrong with me? Do I look okay? Anything I should be aware of? And it's a distraction. It also tends to tire you out. So what you do is you just look at the camera because that's the eye. It's everybody's eye. When you're looking at the camera, everybody thinks you're looking right at their eye. So try to focus on the camera. Don't try to focus on those little boxes because then you're not looking at them in the eye. And you're also distracting yourself, which is going to hinder your performance. Hopefully that addresses the point that somebody asked about the lockdown conditions. Again, we'll have a Q&A at the end, so if you still have questions, we can revisit it or bring up some other points. So that's a little bit about eye contact. And the second nonverbal topic we're going to touch on today, if my clicker works, is this problem, what do you do with your hands? Because when you're speaking, that seems to be the problem. Don't feel bad. Even the professionals have a problem with this. Think about these people you see on the TV news, okay? The reporters out in the field. If they have a microphone, they just hold the microphone and talk into it. And they don't have to worry about what to do with their hands because they're doing what they need to do. If they don't have a microphone in their hand, if they've got a lapel mic or maybe a mic hanging from a boom above them, and then their hands are free, they usually go into this thing I call driving in the rain, where they clasp their hands and open, and they clasp and they open like the windshield wipers when they're driving in the rain. And that's distracting. It's distracting because any repetitive movement is a distraction to people who are watching. So these are the professionals who get paid to be on TV and speak to everybody every day, and they don't know what to do with the hands. So we're going to learn a few tips. What do you do with your hands when you're speaking to a group? In the old days, they would say, just stand with your hands at your sides, like a statue. In fact, even statues seem more lively than that sometimes. But that doesn't work anymore because there's so much information and stimulus going on around us that everybody and everything is competing for our attention. And you need to be somewhat lively and animated to get people to notice you. So you have to do something with your hands. What do you do? And there's no magical gesture that you should do, but there's a lot of things that you do not want to do. All right? Scratching, rubbing, playing with jewelry, just wringing your hands like you're in total agony. Anything repetitive or unnatural, distracting is not good. Better to eliminate these negative behaviors, the things that you should not be doing, the things that undermine your performance. How do you know what they are? Well, the next time you're in a meeting speaking, have a friend or colleague do a little video of you, and then you can watch the video and say, oh, I didn't know I did that. That doesn't look good. I should stop that. Awareness is the first step, and practice is the second. And after time practicing, you will eliminate that particular behavior from your repertoire. Now, there's a shortcut that I like to recommend, which is using the what I call a purposeful prop. Okay, hold on to something purposeful. For example, if you're giving a presentation, even after you move into your Q&A and you're speaking impromptu at this point, you can still hold the clicker that you've been holding all along. Now, when you're holding the clicker, your hand is purposefully occupied, and the other hand can just hang at your side or maybe come up occasionally to make a gesture, but it takes a lot of the pressure off. Other things you can hold are a whiteboard marker, because usually you're in a room with a whiteboard or a flip chart when you speak at work, or a pen, or at some point in your career, when you get to be a certain age, they will issue you a pair of these specs. And when you hold the specs, not only does it give you something to do with your hand, but it makes you look smart. All right, that's one of the few benefits of getting older. All right. I also like to think, for the gestures that you do, ask yourself, are my hands like butterflies or eagles? Now imagine your hands are butterflies. What do butterflies do? Well, they're very flighty and random and fast, and they tend to be low. So butterflies fly low to the bushes. So any hand gestures that are like that, that are low, that are fast, that are erratic, are weak, because the butterfly is not a strong or confident creature. Instead, you want to make your hands like eagles. Imagine an eagle flying. The eagle flies high. The eagle is very graceful and strong and confident. Nothing erratic, nothing random. It's effortless. But when the eagle spots his prey down below, they strike fast. So that's the kind of hand gestures you want. Big, grand, arching, round gestures, chest high, and then occasionally something more emphatic as needed. And that may take a little bit of practice, but in the meantime, you can still use your purposeful prop. Okay, somebody's asking about the duplicate screen. It looks strange if your eye movement in a virtual platform. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of drawbacks to the virtual platform. It's never going to be as good as a live audience. But unfortunately, that's the world we've got now. And a lot of people are still coming to grips with it. We're getting better. All right. About a year ago, everybody would forget to mute, and there'd be stuff going on, and the backgrounds wouldn't work, and the green screens wouldn't work right, and nobody really knew how to manage the technology or the platform itself. But we're getting better little by little. So the main thing here, focus on that little camera so that people feel that you're making eye contact. And it's always good to encourage people to turn on their cameras. There's a lot of reasons they don't. Some they're just not looking their best. They don't want to be seen. Sometimes it's the background, especially if they're at home. In the office, it's not usually a problem because you're dressed better and you're in a professional environment. Sometimes it could be the bandwidth. In some places, the broadband, the connection just isn't that good. And you don't really have the power for full video. All right, so be a little understanding. I mean, I always ask people to turn on and light up. They don't always do it for whatever reasons. but you take the audience as you find them and you just do your best. Okay, so now let's get to probably the heart of the message today, which is developing your message. Now remember, when you're speaking impromptu, you probably don't have a prepared message. You could. I mean, sometimes you're so familiar with the material, you've discussed it many times, you've got sound bites already in your head, which is fine. But assuming you don't have that, how to develop a message on the fly without a lot of time. Fortunately, your brain works very quickly. So I've got this 3-step formula: scan, select, structure. Scan. You ask yourself, what do I know about this subject? Or what could I say in response to that question? Now, the problem people have with impromptu speaking is not that they don't know what to say. The problem is that they have too much to say, because you've got all this information in your head and you cannot possibly share it all. Your audience cannot absorb it all. They don't want to hear it all. So you've got to first identify, what could I talk about? Well, there's this and this and that. And then select, prioritize. What's the most important thing I want my audience to remember? What's the most important point I want to make? And don't try to tell them too much. You could always add more later. They could always ask you a question and you can add more. Something manageable. So scan everything I know, select what's most important, and then structure. Structure means some sort of template or framework to put your remarks. And there are some standard templates that we cover in the course. There's about 8 or 9 of them. We'll talk briefly about 3 of them today. So you're going to get a lot of practical help in terms of the structure. What are some of the templates we can use? Think about when you were in school, learning mathematics or science or finance. And if you had a formula and you knew the formula, you could easily get the right answer every time. You just take the information you have, which in this case is already in your head, and put it into the right part of the formula, and bingo, the right answer comes out. So with some of the structures that we're going to talk about, you could also take that information, put it into the so-called formula, the template, and you sound like a genius. Now, what is the problem people have with impromptu speaking? In my classes, taught over a period of many years, I find there's 2 concerns. One, I'm not sure what to say. And we've already said, you know plenty, it's just about being selective, scan and select. And then the second concern people have is, what if I sound like a fool? What if I stumble and say the wrong thing and give people a bad impression? All right, people always worry about that. And that's where the structure comes in. By having a good structure, it can make you sound like a genius. And we'll see that as soon as we get to those examples in a little while. So this is the first consideration of developing your message, the scan, select, structure formula. But there's another, if you will, formula that I like to discuss in terms of messaging, which is attention, clarity, and impact. And this is a 3-step hierarchy. I'm going to show you guys an example in a minute where we actually look at a message and deconstruct it according to these criteria. But your first task, anytime you're speaking to people, is to get their attention. Because if you do not get their attention, if nobody is interested, it doesn't matter what your message is. It doesn't matter how good it is. They're not listening. So first, get their attention. Second, clarity. Is the message clear? Because if they give you the precious gift of their attention, but you give them a bunch of incomprehensible gibberish so that they don't understand what you're trying to say, your message will also fail. It isn't your audience's job to figure out what you mean. It's your job to make it so clear that anybody can understand it. And then the third step of this hierarchy is impact. Does my message get the result that I want? And a lot of times you don't really know if you're going to have impact until later. For example, let's say you're a salesperson or you're making a pitch, trying to sell management on an idea. All right, you need to get their attention, first of all. You need to have a clear message so that they'll understand and remember it and take action. But the action may not come until a long time later. Sometimes the sales cycle goes on for months or even years. You look at some of the American political campaigns. It takes 1.5 years or 2 years of messaging, and every candidate wants the vote. So they've got to get attention. They've got to have a clear message. And they're not going to know if they get that impact until election day, which could be a long time in the future. But we still need to prepare for that. We need to optimize our message so that it's most likely to get the impact that we want. So to illustrate this, I'm going to show you an example of a simple message. And we're going to analyze it in terms of, does it get your attention? Is the message clear? And does the message have impact? Is it likely that people will act on that message? All right, so imagine you're walking out in the open in Boat Key or Clark Key or someplace where there's a lot of entertainment establishments, bars and restaurants and clubs and so on. And you see one of these racks of postcards, not the ones with the merlion that you can buy in Chinatown, but the ones that are free and usually have some sort of message, whether it's an advertisement, a campaign, a cause. All right, you've seen these postcards before. So imagine you've got a rack with maybe 20 of these postcards. You're not going to notice all of them. But whoever is sending the message wants you to notice theirs. So I'm going to show you an actual postcard I picked off one of these racks. It's been a while, but it's still there. And let me know if this gets your attention. That's the front of the postcard. So if you saw this amidst a bunch of other postcards, would you notice this? Would this get your attention? If so, you could just unmute and say yes, or you could type in yes. All right, I'm getting a lot of yeses. All right, so how does this get your attention? I mean, we don't know what the message is yet. We just know that it does get our attention. So let me ask, is this an emotional appeal? Or like most business messages, is this a logical appeal? Okay, it's an emotional appeal very clearly, but of all the emotions that people have, which emotion does this evoke? What is the emotion that you're feeling as you look at this picture? Somebody said brutality, anger, horrified, horror, pain, shock. Okay, this is a very strong negative emotion. Now, you can have positive emotions or negative. They both work. I mean, there's not clearly a right or wrong. Either could work. And this is a very strong negative emotion, and it gets you by the throat. And it says, notice me. I've got something to say to you. All right, so this definitely passes the first hurdle. It gets your attention. We don't know what the message is yet, but if we turn the postcard over to the back, we can read the message. And let's see if that's a clear message. So take a few seconds and read that. Okay, so it's a pretty clear message, I think. They want you to save the tunas, or at least this particular species of bluefin tuna that was endangered. So don't sell or buy or eat this fish. There's plenty of fish in the sea you can eat, but don't eat this one. All right, so save the tuna, that's a pretty clear message. And they've got a little tagline there: when you see tuna, think panda. Because you've seen this image before, except instead of pandas, they were tuna at the Japanese tuna market. Everybody has seen that iconic image before. But when you see it as a tuna, nobody really cares because we eat tuna all the time. But when you see it as these poor, cuddly pandas, then people get outraged and angry and horrified and shocked. Okay, so they're trying to combine these two ideas to make the point. But that's just the technique. The message is very clear: save the tunas. So we've got the attention, we've got the clarity. Now the third thing is impact. Is this going to work? Are people going to eat less tuna? And we don't know. I mean, this takes time, but if this is a good campaign, not just a postcard, but if they have TV shows and stories and newspaper and radio, and there's buzz, and the message is out there, then people will possibly take action. You can make an inference based on analogy with the shark's fin thing. About 15 years ago, we heard a lot of information and news and stories about the cruelty of shark's fin fishing. And gradually, over a period of a few years, people began to eat less shark's fin. They wouldn't serve it at their weddings. People were not upset, even if they gave a big 𝗟𝗶𝗲, if they didn't get the shark's fin, because the message got through and it had an impact. So if the tuna people do it right, then I think there's a good chance they will also have an impact. All right, so that's just an example of your task of getting attention, having a clear message, and getting the impact you want. Now, the problem is how to do that in a short business meeting when you don't have a prepared slide deck. So for that, we're going to look at the 3 templates. Again, in the full course, we cover a lot more, but these are 3 basic ones just to give you an idea so that when you leave here, you'll have some idea of a structure. Remember the scan, select, structure. You need a structure to put your ideas from your head into so your audience can be clear about it, remember it, act on it. So the first of the 3 templates is the very basic 3 points. Now, I've been doing this since I started talking. Remember the title: Impromptu Speaking with Confidence, Clarity, and Conviction. Those were 3. Scan, select, structure. Attention, clarity, impact. It's not an accident. I could have thought of 4 things, but 3 is the magic number. 3 is what works. 3 is what people remember. I just did it again. All right, so 3 points. If you can't think of any other structure, you can always think of 3 points. It could be 3 reasons, 3 examples, 3 adjectives to describe something, right? Surely goodness and mercy, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. All right, it's always 3. So give your audience 3 things. It doesn't have to be everything. 3 things is enough for them to think about. So that's the most basic template. And you might want to use that as a default. Because if you're learning 8 or 9 of these templates, you may not be able to remember them all at a given moment, but you could always remember the big 3. All right, the second template is pros and cons. Anytime people ask you for your opinion, you should be thinking pros and cons. And in business, people always want to know, what do you think? Even if you're a customer, they do market research to find out what their customers think, what people like, what do they want, what do they need. So the pro and con always have that available. So let's say your boss asks you a question and you weren't expecting this, you don't have anything prepared, you don't have an answer ready. And she says something like, what do you think about this proposal? And maybe you don't even know what you think about it yet. You can still give an answer using the pros and cons. So you think, well, on the pro side, and then come up with a few reasons. How many reasons? Maybe 3, especially if you eventually do take the pro side. So let's say you're a pro. So yeah, 3 reasons because of A, B, and C. On the other hand, and then you go into the con side, because you want to be objective and present both sides of the story, you might have, these are the cons or the drawbacks if we go with that proposal, D, E, and F. Now, obviously, if you've already made up your mind and you're pro, you probably want 3 pros and maybe 1 con. I mean, it would be nice if there were no cons at all, but then that just means you're biased. So you have to have at least 1 small con to go with your 3 pros. But let's say you really don't even know what you think. You don't have any idea. So forget about 3. You just think of how many pros are there? What are some of the advantages, at least the main advantages? And you list those, whether it's 3 or 4, doesn't matter. And then on the con side, there's maybe 2 or 3 or 5, who knows how many. You go through the pros, you go through the cons. Now, in conclusion, because of the above, I believe we should, and then you give your answer. When you were asked the question, you didn't have an answer. You didn't know what you wanted to say, you didn't know what you thought. But when you go through the pros and you go through the cons, you're thinking out loud, you're analyzing the situation, and you probably come up with an idea of where you stand on that matter. So the pros and cons are very useful, and you can combine the 3 points with the pros or with the cons. In fact, almost all of these techniques can be mixed and matched like Lego bricks and build all kinds of complicated structures. And the third one, also very common in business, problem, options, solution. So what is the problem? Business is about solving problems. So you state the problem, you frame it. How you frame it is important, but we don't have time to discuss framing today. And then you give a few options. An option is a possible solution to the problem. How many options? Probably 3. Maybe 2 if you want to make it a very clear choice, but not 4, not 5. That's too much. So you address the problem. These are the 3 options, and you can give the pro and con of each option and 3 points for each of the pros and cons. And then you get to your proposed solution. You could spend an hour doing this. But because you've got this template in mind and all those facts are swimming around in your head anyway, you put the facts into your little template here. You could discuss it at length in detail and still sound like a genius. So those are the 3 simple techniques. I just want to run through a few pointers about the Q&A. All right. For the Q&A, remember we said most people end their presentation, please let there be no questions. Well, you want questions because questions are what give you insight into what your audience is thinking. Do they agree with me? Are they on board? Are they going along with my rationale, or do I need to change my approach? All right, this is very useful. When you write a memo, you can make it perfect, but you don't know what the audience is thinking. So you want the Q&A. So how to master the Q&A, which is really the main form for impromptu speaking in most business settings. All right, first you want to be calm and gather your thoughts. You can pause a bit. You don't have to launch right into an answer. During that time, you're doing your scan, select, and choosing a template or structure, and then address the question. Now, what happens if you don't know the answer? It's very common. And the old school suggestion, well, let me check, what do you guys think? All right, that means you don't know. I mean, it used to work, now probably doesn't. It's still legit sometimes. I mean, if you present it the right way. There's a lot of really talented people here. I just want to hear what you guys are thinking, or you might even flip it to your colleague, do a little Tai Chi. You know, my colleague Clara is more up to speed on that particular topic. I'll let her handle that for you. All right, it's possible to do that. But you want to have something to say. You don't want to say, I don't know. So one of the things you can do is give a partial answer. All right, you never want to say, I don't know. Say what you do know. All right, life is complicated. Nobody knows all the answers to everything. It's okay not to know everything, but give them some indication. Well, you know, we've been thinking about it. I've spoken to a number of people. I've identified a few points of attack. I think I'm going in this direction. We're going to have a meeting tomorrow, me and my team, and we'll discuss it, and I'll have more for you later. That sounds like you've done a lot. It's a lot better than saying, I don't know, which is really what you were thinking, wasn't it? Okay. So at this point, we've been almost an hour. We started a bit late, but some of you may be wanting to get back to another appointment or something after an hour. So let me open it up to Q&A. If anybody has any questions, you can type it into the chat. Okay, how much is the full program? I'm not sure. I don't do the pricing decisions. I know they've got different, you know, depending on how many people from your company go, you can contact Aventis. I believe it's, you know, subject to these various subsidies that they have, and it's not a lot. I mean, it's not in the thousands by any means. It's somewhere in the low few hundreds. That's the best I can tell you, but Aventis will help you with that. Yeah, you can, somebody's asking, I guess if you're looking at the chat, you know what they're asking. We can use the templates to guide us through a Q&A session. Definitely. A lot of people do this informally. You may automatically do the threes, okay? A lot of people are in that habit already. This is not rocket science. It's just that in the heat of the moment, a lot of times your mind goes blank and you're not sure how to address it. So having the structure, 3 things or pro and con, or some of the ones that we cover in the course, help you take what's in your head and present it in a nice way that looks very thoughtful and considered, even though you didn't prepare it in advance. How do we calm our nerves? Okay, the unexpected question should always be expected. In all fairness, if they're asking you a question, it's probably because you've got a lot of expertise in that subject. So you should have something to say about it. If you're totally not the one to address that, they shouldn't be asking you. So you could do what we just said, flip it over to somebody else, or you could give them a basic answer. Maybe 3 basic points, an outline, and then follow up with them later. Okay, somebody's asking, and by the way, calming down, let me just, since I don't like to just give pat answers, a lot of times people give bad advice where you tell yourself, I can do this, I'm not nervous, I've got it. That's horrible advice because your body is already reacting in fear and it doesn't believe you. It's not going to be convinced just because you've got some mantra that says, I can do this, I've got it, I'm the expert. All right, it's well-intentioned, but it doesn't work. What I would suggest, instead of telling yourself, I'm not afraid, I'm not anxious, I'm not nervous, say, this is exciting that I have a chance to share this information with my friends and my colleagues. Now, when your body hears that, your body is thinking exciting. All right, maybe it is excitement. After all, when you go on a roller coaster, are you afraid or are you excited? When you go in a haunted house, are you afraid or are you excited? I mean, it's kind of the same feeling in terms of your body. It's just the label that you put on it. So instead of giving it a bad label that says, I'm afraid, I'm anxious, say, I'm excited to be here. And you feel that little thrill, that tingle. It's kind of like anxiety, but it's in a more positive direction. So I hope that helps. What if the audience is not very interactive or even dead silence? How to mitigate? All right, that should be feedback. Nobody kills them every time. All right, even the best masters, I've seen them fall flat on occasion. So ask yourself, what do I learn from this? What did I do wrong? How could I do better? Because this is a process, it's a journey. All right, so that's one thing you can do. The other thing is just to understand the limitations of the platform. For example, in the full course, I show some little videos. I didn't do that today because I know technology isn't always with you. I wanted a little bit of interaction. So I made sure to ask, what emotion are you feeling? How many in your audience? I mean, I could have done this without asking that. But there are ways, even little ways, to get engagement. And all right, here's another question. If the boss asks the team for comments, how can you think of a comment very quickly? All right, wouldn't we all like to know that? Okay, it's really everything we've talked about. Once you start practicing, and in the class we do practice, and even afterwards, you practice on your own. You get better, you're more comfortable with the templates. You'll find that there's 2 or 3 templates you really like that are suited to the kind of work you do or the kind of thinking that you're comfortable with. So you don't have to learn a lot. You focus on a few of those. But it's like we said, if you're going into a meeting, ask yourself, if they ask me this question or if they ask for comments, what can I say? And then you prepare it in advance so that it's not really impromptu. It looks like it, it sounds like it, but you've got the answer already prepared. Okay. Okay, we do have a negotiation course somebody was asking about. Aventis can give you that information. All right, so we're a little past 2. I wish we had more time. I hope I see some of you guys in the course or in some other course, or you could always find me out there in cyberspace and email me, and I'll be happy to give you whatever other help I can. All right. Okay, well, in that case, I'll wrap it up. Thank you for your time. I hope this helps. I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.